This is the evening edition, time to sit back and relax and chew over some of the big stories of the day. And to do that, we're joined by two special guests. Albie Amankona, Conservative commentator and broadcaster, here in the studio. Evening.
Good evening.
Hello. And Leif Arbuthnot, Assistant Editor at The Week. Leif, hello.
Hello.
Lovely to be joined by you. Let's pick up on that last story then. So this is the new procedure or operation, as Dr. Andrew Jenkinson said he preferred to call it. It's called endoscopic sleeve gastroplasty. Doesn't sound pleasant, does it? But it is aimed as one way of tackling obesity. Are we getting it right here, Albie? There's the weight loss injections, there are gastric bypasses, there's this new procedure, all on people who are already obese. Is it right that the funding is put in that direction?
No, I think we've got it all upside down, Kate. Call me old-fashioned, but I think maybe we should be trying to stop people getting so fat in the first place. And it is very difficult. Because there's this weird dogma in both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party that if we tax food producers that produce this unhealthy food, highly processed, high in salt, high in sugar, somehow we're infringing on people's individual freedom. We're not. We did it with smoking very successfully. We should do it the same thing with processed food. And also, we should be encouraging people to simply eat less and move more so they don't get fat in the first place. I don't know why either of those two things are such controversial things to say in 2023, and instead we'd rather fund people to have operations. That's what this is, an operation. You can die from operations. You're in a lot of pain afterwards, whereas eat less, move more, it improves your physical and mental health.
That strategy is often used, not tax on sugary, salty food, of course. That's what Dr. Andrew Jenkinson was really pushing for when I spoke to him a little earlier. But Leif, one could say, well, you know, we are better at educating on ultra-processed foods. We are better on diet and all manner of awareness, but it's still not working. People are getting more obese.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, I wish that there was more being done to sort of stop people getting really fat. But we are where we are, and 25% of the population is obese. I think that stuff should be done to help these people become not obese, whether it's, injections or operations. I think, ideally, people wouldn't need to get to this stage where they're having to literally have someone come and sort of staple their stomach into a smaller size. But realistically, if that's going to stop them from leading, quite a sort of unhealthy lifestyle sometimes, that might end up costing the NHS a lot more than this operation, then I'm supportive of it.
Shall I describe what the procedure is? I hope everyone's finished their dinner, by the way. It is an accordion procedure. It works by inserting a flexible tube with a camera and medical instruments into the stomach through a patient's mouth, so it doesn't require cuts and surgery. Sections of the stomach wall are then folded and stitched together to create a tube-like sleeve, reducing the size of the stomach by 2/3. Our doctor said he wouldn't recommend it to his patients. He's really concerned about this.
It sounds awful. I mean, how can that be better?
How much stomach should you have?
Well, exactly.
To be able to put it into an accordion type?
How can that be better than government intervention to stop these companies producing this food, which is so unhealthy in the first place, and then making the taxpayers spend all of this money on healthcare to try and solve a problem which companies are making? What is the problem with that? I don't understand why both the Conservatives and Labour are so scared of taxing these big food production companies. Maybe they're being lobbied very hard like the tobacco companies were, but if we don't solve this problem, it's going to be a bigger problem in years to come.
All right. Labour's stance on private schools, let's talk about that, made the headlines again today. Sir Keir Starmer denied launching an attack on private schools after he had to abandon plans to strip them of their charitable status because it would require a change in the statutory definition of charity, which could have wider implications for the sector. What we do know, though, is that he confirmed the party would still press ahead with applying a 20% VAT on school fees immediately if it won the general election. Albie, I understand you're privately educated?
Yes, I went to both a state school and a private school for secondary school.
OK. How come you switched from one to the other?
So I was very badly bullied at the state school I was at, and it wasn't a very good state school. I didn't feel that it was giving me the level of education that I wanted. So I went out and found a school that I wanted to go to. Parents couldn't afford it, mum couldn't afford it. Come from a
How
single...
old were you when you did this?
About 13.
Goodness me,
about
okay.
13. So I grew up in a council house. Mum could not afford to send me to a private school. I found the school. One of my mum's clients said she would pay for part of the school fees, and the rest of it was paid for by a bursary and a scholarship from the school itself. And my concern with this change in charitable status, which isn't happening, or this application of VAT to private schools, is the first thing they're going to cut are going to be the pots of money which are available for people from underprivileged backgrounds like mine to go to schools like the school I went to, Emmanuel, in South West London. I wouldn't have had that opportunity.
How big are those pots of money? Because I did a sweeping search of some of the private schools near me. I live in South East London. There are some, really quite well-renowned schools near me. And bursaries seem to be about £3,000, not a touch really on how much it would cost to send a child to private school for a year. So I was left thinking, do those bursaries, do those, generous offers even exist anymore? Leaf, have you got any experience of this?
I had a small scholarship to the private school that I went to, and it wasn't enough to touch the sides of the bills that my parents were paying. And particularly if your private school isn't a very old and historically male school, then the bursaries that private school will have to offer typically are much smaller than, say, the bursaries that Eton, Winchester are able to offer. There's a concern that this VAT policy is going to fall on the schools that aren't famous, not the Etons of this world, but the smaller private schools. I'm actually on the fence about this. When I was at private school, I remember, it was a kind of running joke how, uncharitable this supposedly charitable school was. It seemed that the state school kids would sometimes come and swim in our swimming pool, but beyond that, the school didn't really do very much for the community, although perhaps that's changed. So, and
I don't know whether it has.
Parents...
Yeah, I mean, not in my experience. I think some of the private schools near us are helpful. Are they overly helpful? Maybe not.
I think there's definitely more private schools need to be doing to help their communities and other students from underprivileged backgrounds. I actually think there's a huge role for boarding schools, in particular for children perhaps in the care sector. We look at the outcomes of children from the public care sector versus the outcomes of children from
how much the cost
boarding
difference
schools.
is, actually.
And there's probably not much cost difference,
well,
but the outcomes are huge.
I think it's generally, just as expensive to send a kid to Eton as it is to have a child in care. I mean, I don't know that that's a fair comparison for lots of complicated reasons, but I agree. It just seems like so cloud cuckoo land that kids in care are going to somehow miraculously get places at lots of private schools that I can't even
Surely that satisfies both, though, doesn't it? It satisfies the need
but
for.
It's not going to happen.
But why shouldn't it happen? Why shouldn't we be using this kind of big thinking to use these amazing institutions that British private schools are, world renowned for their educational application, on solving some of the social problems that we have in society?
How about some sort of tax break then for private schools who can prove that they are, and the main aim here, Labour want to level up, OK? Rishi Sunak's also said this, by the way, that they want state schools to be just as good as private schools, which I think is a bit for the birds, to be honest. I don't understand how that would happen in my experience. But if there is to be a bit of levelling up, why not promote that by giving then tax breaks to private schools, which then immediately help the state sector raise its level?
I think private schools who can demonstrate that they are doing something helpful for their communities and for their local societies should retain not paying VAT. They should retain their charitable status. There are some private schools that do a very good job at that. There are some private schools that do an awful job at that say they are doing a good job at it, and they're not, and that is appalling.
So it's a bit of a racket.
Well, exactly. Just the rules actually need to be applied rather than people trying to wiggle out of them, and the rules have to mean something. And without a sanction, perhaps saying we're going to make you pay VAT if you don't actually open up your pool or accept this many underrepresented students, then I think the sanctions are necessary.
Keir Starmer said schools don't have to pass on the VAT charge if they're worried about parents being put off. How does that work? Has anyone worked that out yet? Do they pay the VAT on their own? I don't understand. I do fill out VAT returns, but I don't understand how that would. I thought if you were VAT registered, then you had to apply the charge.
I'm not sure, but I don't think we're necessarily going to see schools immediately, taking 20% off, their outgoings. It's going to be an enormously complicated situation. What I am a bit worried about is the kind of the speed with which this might come in, and some schools that are maybe not as like hot on, maybe as they don't have as good administrative capacities. They might be really suddenly bitten by this. Like the timescale on this is really quite soon, so schools better get prepared if it's really going to happen.
Yeah, sure. If Labour are successful at the next election, they want to add VAT to fees in the first academic year after an election, so that could be potentially from next September.
And on the electoral impact of that, I think there's something like 1 million parents that send their children to private schools. Now, if those 1 million parents who might be thinking, I might vote Labour at the next election because I don't really like Suella Braverman's speech this week and Rishi Sunak's 5 pledges aren't going very well, they might think twice about doing that now if they know that in the first term of a Labour government, they're going to be paying 20% extra for their children's school fees. So it could be not the best electoral sense as well.
OK, I'm going to move on to GB News, but just to get your point of view on it, Albie, if that's OK. You do work on a show there, and I know on Twitter you've been quick to condemn the comments of Lawrence Fox. He's issued a video apology this evening. There are thousands of complaints into Ofcom. As someone who presents there, who is, fairly close to this story for the kind of natural assumptions, did you have to consider your position at GB News when you heard what Lawrence Fox said and Dan Wootton's response?
Look, I think GB News handled the situation so quickly that people didn't have to consider their positions. If we look at how quickly GB News responded to that situation, by the mid-morning of the next day, my now suspended colleague was suspended. Later on that day, my now suspended colleague Dan Wootton was suspended. The situation was handled very quickly, and I think very well by the management at GB News. If we look at how long it has taken other broadcasters to take people off air or suspend them or sanction them for bad behaviour, either on or off air, I can think of 2 broadcasters recently that have done that. I won't name them, but it certainly didn't happen the next day, Kate. So actually, I think the whole situation has been very unfortunate and very difficult for people close to the situation. And I hope the investigation concludes as quickly as possible, and we can find a way forward.
Commentators saying GB News shouldn't be on air; it should be taken off air.
I think that's nonsense. I've got a lot of respect for Adam, your colleague Adam Bolton, who presents the Sunday show here.
He isn't the only person saying this.
But he's one of the main people who's been saying it. But I think that is a load of nonsense. We live in a liberal media environment. We have a regulator, Ofcom, who will make a decision based on whatever they need to do with the situation. It's not for BBC commentators, people in the government to be saying that GB News should be off air. That's a decision for the regulator. I don't think GB News is going to be taken off air, by the way. And we have a great and diverse media environment in this country, of which Times Radio is a part, of which Sky is a part. We've got to remember these new media organisations, this is where Adam has worked. So why does he want to be taking away that opportunity from young people like me who work at GB News, who are making their careers, who've got nothing to do with any of the stuff that happened earlier on this week, who just want to get on, and that is what I will be doing.
Good. OK. All right. Thank you. Should we finish with a bit of an unbelievable story? Something like heading into Cher, is there, at the end of a discussion panel. She's been accused of, this is bizarre, by the way, she's been accused of hiring men to kidnap her son from a hotel where he was staying with his wife last year. Court documents filed by Elijah Blue Allman's wife, Mariangela King, she's a British-born musician, alleged that 4 men removed him from a New York hotel room on their anniversary in November 2022. The pair had reportedly been at the hotel attempting to save their marriage after filing for divorce in 2021. We won't get into the case because it is a bit odd, but I wonder what lengths your parents have gone to try and interrupt a union that they weren't entirely pleased with. Would you ever pull a Cher? Have you ever had a Cher pulled on you, Leaf?
Actually, no. I'm embarrassed to say that my parents have liked my sort of, the two boyfriends I had, and now I'm engaged. They've liked these men, and they especially love their prospective son-in-law. So they haven't had to stage interventions. But I quite support the idea of staging an intervention. If it's really necessary. Particularly,
a kidnap's a bit extreme.
If your kid is underage, then yes. But maybe if they're sort of in their 30s or 40s, it does get a bit weird.
Yes, he was. How old was he, Cher's
47.
47.
47. I mean, I couldn't even imagine my mum staging a kidnap for me now, and I'm certainly not 47. It's an odd story, isn't it? You read about the lives of these Hollywood children, and you're just so sad for a lot of the hardship that they've been through. I think this man was a drug addict at some point in his life. His marriage has obviously broken down. His mother's still having to, be quite interventionist in his life when he's nearly 50 years old. And you sort of think when you're younger, it'd be so easy if I was a celebrity's son or daughter. But then you see situations like this and you think, well, maybe I'm lucky to be normal.
Smuggling your child away. Have your parents ever tried to intervene? I was just thinking about my parents. Are famous, by the way, for never giving an opinion, my parents in our family. So I just wouldn't know. Literally would not know, let alone an intervention. Are you always given a strong idea about what your parents might think about your relationship or your friends?
My mum has always let me figure things out on my own in the hope that I would come to the right decision. And she'll always tell me when she thinks I've come to the right decision. And she'll always be like, Albie, I'm so glad that you've made this decision because I didn't want to get involved, but this is what I wanted you to do. And actually, more or less, that's what's happened. And I think that's probably quite a good parent-child relationship to have.
That's a very good tip.
You let them get on with it, and then hopefully they come around, and then they do come around.
And you don't say, I told you so. You say, I'm really proud that you've
reached this decision. Exactly. Shout out to Pam Wrigley.
Yes, parenting book published next year. Lovely. Thank you to both of you for joining us. Always a pleasure. Leaf Arbuthnot, thank you to you. And Albie Amankona, thank you to you.
Thank you.
This is Kait.